And I think we are live. What's up, guys? This is Munir Lazuni. Welcome to the Driven Men's Podcast number 6. Today, we're going to be talking with a very, very amazing driven man in his own right, Mr. Fraser Noble, a Scotsman who lives in Singapore, who is the CEO of Noble Life, where he works with businessmen, high performers, entrepreneurs who are at the highest level in business, but have found that they need to get back in touch with more balance in their life, with fitness, with their families, so that they can find the right levels of energy and happiness and fulfillment within their lives. So Fraser, thanks so much for being on, man. Let's hear a little bit about you, your backstory, your history.
It's my pleasure, Munir. Thank you for having me on. So what I'll do right now is I'll talk about myself for a little bit. I know that's not what everybody wants to hear, but it's important to know why somebody does something. So my history is effectively, I moved out to Singapore as an expatriate, and I had a job in the oil and gas industry. Now, I started off as an offshore engineer, and the whole time I was working in that kind of environment with a lot of very successful, very intelligent men, I noticed that most of them, although they were very, very good at their jobs, they weren't that awesome at life. So you would see them being a little bit unhealthy, maybe a little bit socially awkward. Their relationships were always in a mess. They were always complaining about their home lives. And bearing in mind that these are guys that spend half of their year away from their families by proxy, that's part of the job. And I thought to myself at the time, well, I seem to be doing quite well at it, so I'll help who I can. So that's what I did when I was offshore with the guys. I'd show them how I did it and just, share the love, as it were. And I just sort of thought that that's just what happens in that kind of industry, because it is a very rough and tumble industry. Then I was promoted into management and then into senior regional management. And I realized that it didn't matter which country I went to. It didn't matter which level or which people I was talking to. It was all the same. If I was in Saudi, talking to these guys that run Saudi Aramco, they all had the same complaints. They were doing really well in their workplace, but they struggled with their health, they struggled with their relationships, they struggled with time, and they struggled to actually be able to get that balance right. And again, Dubai, Australia, UK, doesn't matter where I went, different cultures were all the same. And I realized this, which many people don't understand, is that there is a global culture, and the individual cultures throughout the world have only got very small differences to them. People are people. They all have the same problems. And in the same sense, people that work in that sort of high stress, high driven, sort of professional or entrepreneurial environments, that basically has its own culture. And that culture is that you must put your work first. That is the biggest problem that I found, is that these guys, they end up putting themselves and their families at detriment, because that is the global culture of these businesses. And when I realized that, I thought that was quite shocking. But even so, I continued to raise up in the ladder, continue to work hard, but I also managed to keep my balance quite well. I've always been into health and fitness, and that was a good thing for me as an anchor. That was the foundation which kept this going. And that's something that I still use in my program, is the health and fitness side of things as the anchor. And then everything else works on from there. So as I was doing that, it was still the same situation. And then I had something happen to me a few years ago, where a very close family friend who'd fallen into the same trap, extremely stubborn, wouldn't listen to advice, wouldn't take advice, wouldn't ask for help. And effectively, he was so engrossed in his business that he ended up having not one but 2 divorces with estranged children who wouldn't speak to their father. His social life was in bits because he spent every waking minute at work. And as a result, his health just started to deteriorate as well. Smoked too much, drank too much, didn't eat very well at all, despite the fact that his business was actually in catering. He was a catering owner. He owned a big catering company. A lot of what they did was making sure people ate healthily within international schools and big businesses and things like that. But he wasn't doing that for himself, because this is also one thing I'll touch on later on, is that people might be good at one thing in their work, but they don't cross it into their personal lives. But long story short here, this man who was very close to me and my family ended up having a massive brain aneurysm on the Friday night after work.
Wow.
He died. Nobody even checked on him until Monday afternoon when the boss didn't turn up to work. Now, when that happened, it made me realize that it's not good enough just to help one or two people when they ask. It's not good enough to go to a business meeting in Qatar and have somebody say, "Oh, how are you managing to keep the balance?" and then help them out. I needed to do something about it. And that's when I resigned and started Noble Life. And that's what we do now, is we've got the program, the Noble Men, and within the Noble Men, we focus on men just like him, just like I was, that are in entrepreneurial or managerial driven positions in the professional world, who know what they're doing in their working life. They may even know what they're doing in one or two aspects of their personal life, but the idea is to get the whole balance. Because the way I look at it is that it's like a set of cogs, a set of gears, as it were. And your health, your wellness, your mental capacity, your mental fortitude, your emotional ability, your communication skills, that's the driver cog. That's the one with all of the power behind it. And if you don't make sure that that cog is operating properly, your family life, your social life, your working life, your romantic life, any other cog that you put onto that set of gears is going to start to slow down. But if you make sure that that driver cog is strong, if you make sure that driver cog is working efficiently, what's going to end up happening is anytime there's a little bit of rust in one of these cogs, that driver cog's going to have the power to keep it moving until you can actually get to repairing it properly. Whereas if you focus on one of the cogs within the machine, let's call it your working life, your working cog, and you're not looking after the driver cog, when that driver cog starts to slow down, everything slows down. And inevitably things like what happened to Eddie happened. Doesn't matter how good you are at your job, if you're not looking after yourself, you are going to become more inefficient. You're going to have lower energy levels. You're not going to be as good at your job as you could be if you looked after your driver cog. And that, in a sense, is exactly why I started doing what I'm doing now, and why I am so driven to help as many men as I can with their work, life, health, family balance. So I know that was quite of a long introduction, but I felt that it was
powerful. That's powerful. I'm happy to hear it, man, because obviously you and I have chatted quite a bit before, having known each other for, I think, almost 6 months now. And I remember a couple of months back, something you said that was really powerful, that really spoke to me, was when you're speaking about your movement, you're not just looking to change a couple people's lives. You're literally looking to change the entire way that the global culture looks at work-life balance. And that's powerful, because that's not just a program, it's a movement. And at the time when I was first starting my movement, that really spoke a lot to me and inspired me to make my movement more about just being confident, happy, great, and successful, but rather actually changing the way that the modern generation of men looks at life. Because one big thing I see with guys, and part of why I do what I do, as those of you who are watching this probably already know from my previous videos, is that a lot of guys are stuck in this boy way of thinking, right? Where guys haven't grown up. Guys are complaining, not taking ownership, blaming everything outside of themselves. They're not actually taking ownership, stepping up as a man, and doing the things that you may not want to do or feel like doing, that you need to do to actually get to where you want to go, because that's what a man does. And so it was interesting to see how, with the generation of men that you're helping, the problems are definitely different, especially with the subset of men that you work with, yet some things are universal, because fitness is the backbone. And for you, even when you were working in that profession before actually stepping out and becoming the coach, because you have a background in athletics and it's always been a part of your life that you've put in the work to maintain, that fitness was always a backbone for you to have the balance where you could be at the bar having a drink and still having a flat stomach, as we talked about. And you can also work really, really hard and still, be a great husband to your partner as well as everything else that you do. So that's awesome, man. But when guys don't take care of their bodies or take care of themselves, there's a lot of different symptoms that come up. One being obviously having the appearance and looking out of shape, but also feeling tired, drained, burnt out, not taking care of oneself. And I think that's a big thing where a lot of guys don't make themselves a priority. Now, the majority of the clients who I work with are single, though I do have a couple married guys in the program. And a lot of people use, whether it's their job, whether it's their family, they use these things as an excuse. And it's interesting because for your guys, it's their job. For my guys, the excuses vary. But ultimately, these things all come down to stories that we tell ourselves that we can't do things, limiting beliefs that hold us back from getting to where we want to go. And a very powerful analogy I heard with a coach that we both know, LJ, in the mastermind that we're a part of. He used the analogy, and I talked about this on a previous podcast, that guys wear the shining armor of, hey, I'm making this sacrifice of myself for my kids, for my wife, for my family, for my job, in the case of your clients. And the shining armor becomes tighter and tighter as we get more and more out of shape until we no longer fit that shining armor, and we have to make a change. So what are you went a little bit into the symptoms that some of the guys that you got, or actually, especially with Eddie, the man who you'd mentioned, who actually had an aneurysm because he had so much stress and, poor health. We talked a little bit about the causes. So what are some of the solutions that you've been able to really help guys with as far as like what they need to do to get out of that place, Fraser?
So, well, before I can go into the solutions, what I've actually got to look at is what they're actually needing to fix. Because a lot of the time, like you get guys that will come and they'll say, oh, I'm wanting to lose my gut, or I'm wanting to look in better shape. And they think that is the problem, but it's not. That's a byproduct of the problem, or that's a driver point of the problem. What I normally do is the first thing when anybody says to me, oh, I want to lose my gut. Why? Why do you want to lose your gut? Oh, because I want to look better. Well, why do you want to look better? Well, I just feel like I'm not as confident as I once was when I didn't have the gut. Okay, why not? Oh, because I don't seem like, when people look at me, I don't look like I'm in as much control if I've let myself get out of shape. And how does that impact your life? Well, it means that when I walk into an interview or when I walk into a meeting in the boardroom, people look at me and they think, well, he's a wee bit out of shape and he doesn't control his situation very well. And then you can go even deeper than that. But even if we just stop there. So really what they're saying is that is their own perception of themselves. Because I know for a fact, when I sat in a boardroom, if somebody walked in with a little punch, I wasn't going to be thinking they don't know what they do. But that's what they're feeling. If you're honest with yourself. So the real problem is not actually being out of shape. That can be part of the issue, but a lot of it's mental and emotional. And this is what people need to understand, is that you cannot be healthy, fit, and balanced if you're only looking at one area. The same with the cogs. So the first thing I do when guys join me is, because they're all champing at the bit to get into the gym, and they go, oh, tell me about nutrition, tell me about this. And I'm like, well, guys, that's actually, in fact, that's genuinely 15% of noble life. That's all it is. Health, your fitness, your nutrition, that is a foundation. It's a requirement. It's not even something that you should even need to be told to do. It's just something you have to do. You don't have a choice. It's 15% of it. The rest of it all comes in a lot more challenging, but also a lot more powerful. So the first thing I do when I get the guys in is I get them to prioritize and reflect on their prioritization. This is when you get a lot of the guys putting their job at number one. Because the suit of armor, as you were talking about there, I really like that analogy actually, that they feel that they are putting themselves at danger to fight that dragon, as it were, by putting themselves into a working environment that is potentially unhealthy, that is stressful, that messes with their heads a little bit, But they think that's okay because they're doing it for their kids, they're doing it for their wife. But all too often, if you actually ask the wife or the kids what they really want, they want the relationship to be better, the communication to be better, for their dad or for their husband to come home and want to be at home and be in the moment, to make time for the people that they love. But if you're an absentee father, you end up with estranged children. If you're an absentee husband, you end up divorced.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and these are a lot of the big pain points that these guys reach. I'll just very quickly, I'll just talk about another man, and I'll not mention this guy's name because it was very, very recent. But I feel it's a very important point because it's very powerful. And again, this is somebody that I knew through my professional life. And he lost his permanent residency in Singapore. It's not important why. It was actually a bit dodgy through his ex, but he had 30 days to leave Singapore. But this man, he had gone through all the problems that we speak about. He left his family back home in the UK and he came to Singapore and he got married here, ended up leaving that family as well, had estranged children, strained relationships with his ex-wives, strained relationships with friends because he spent most of his days going out drinking and eating crap and not looking after himself, and thus not looking after his friends and his family as well. Then he had a stroke, and another stroke, and another stroke, and another one, and another one, and another one, and then a sixth stroke. And he was at the point where he was completely incapacitated. He could walk, but he couldn't speak. And as time went on, the walking started to stop as well, and he needed a stick. And then he couldn't really use the stick either. And then he lost his permanent residency. Now, when I was contacted, the first thing I did was contact his family, contact his children. Contacted his children in the UK. Didn't want anything to do with him. Contacted his family in Singapore. And to their credit, they helped a little bit. But when it got to the stage where they needed to actually put themselves out to help, they weren't willing. So this man ended up at the mercy of the Singapore government and the British High Commission. And I helped wherever I could with phone calls and trying to get in touch with people. And he ended up having to go back to the UK as a sick man alone. And when he got to the UK, the only person that was there to meet him was a social worker that between the British High Commission and I, we'd sorted out. Completely alone. So the reason I'm talking about that as well is because when you project it to the extreme examples, because when you talk about going out too much, spending too much time at work, even using work as an excuse to go out and not spend time with the family, you know, because a lot of the time when you get entertaining clients, and then you spend a lot of time entertaining clients. Because you're not really entertaining the clients, you're just going a night out because you don't want to go home.
Right. People are running away, they're escaping.
Exactly. And that is the stories that you were talking about. So the reason I'm talking about that is because if you don't project, when I get these guys to prioritize, I then get them to reflect and then project to what could happen. What if you continued to live the life that you're living right now? What would happen if you continue to spend 16 hours a day in the office and get home and go straight to bed without even kissing your kids goodnight? What happens if you travel so much for work and don't put in the effort when you're home and don't put in the effort to contact your wife? What's going to end up happening? You can see where this is going.
Right.
So a lot of the time guys think, yeah, but I'm okay right now. Yeah, you're okay right now. Let's project it into the future. Kind of think of it like Scrooge, Christmas Carol. You know, it's the ghost of Christmas future. What happens if you continue the way you're continuing? And that's genuinely a powerful visualization. And at this point, these guys get really quite, emotional because they're realizing, wow, that is true. That if I project this out to what could potentially happen, I could end up like Eddie. I could end up like the man I just spoke about. And these things are very, very important to realize and really project into the future. Then I get them to reflect on what they think they should be doing. What do they feel should change? Once they know what they should be changing, they then know where they are, where they could go, what they need to change, and then I get them to really do the visualization. I know a lot of coaches do, and I still use it because it's extremely powerful. As I get them to envision the man that they need to become to have the ideal balance in their life. Once they've done that, and only once they've done that, are they ready to move on to anything else. Now, this could take them one day. It could take them 5 days. It's completely down to the individual. I don't rush it because I feel that it's very important that they do it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they've done that, then we start to look at the other areas that we look at. And this is when we start to look at your ability to manage emotions a little bit more effectively. Now, this is a very important one because people think when you say manage emotions, you mean squash them down into a wee box. No, we're talking about coping and actually using the process to actually deal with what you're feeling so that you actually are able to do the correct actions to prevent, to fix, or to manage. So that's one of the modules we look at. We also look at communication. We look at the ability to communicate. We look at the ability to manage your own time. That's a massive one. A lot of the time people think, oh, well, but if I manage my own time, it means it's taking time away from other things. But actually, if you put in the effort to get that right, you save a lot more and you're able to get everything done. We look at stress management, your ability to deal with pressure. And we look at habitual structure, the ability to actually build habits and build a structure, not just in your working life, but every other aspect as well. And all of this has one familiar point that needs to be exercised throughout all of that: mindfulness. Being mindful of everything that you're doing. And with that, that's when we practice gratitude. We make sure that they've got their own set, personalized rituals that they do during the day to keep themselves mindful. And when we've got all of that in place, we know when we bring in the fitness side of things, when we bring in the training, when we bring in the nutrition, when we bring in the tracking, when we bring in the data, I can then see if they're tracking what they're doing with their training, tracking from what they're doing with their nutrition, if they've built a habitual structure. Because if they've not got the habitual structure in their training, in their nutrition, do I honestly believe that they are practicing their stress management exercise? Do I honestly think they're practicing time management? Are they truly planning their week? Are they truly exercising their record, analyze, change exercises, or rack exercises? And that's why I use the fitness and the health aspect as the foundation for their foundation and their habitual structure, so that everything else can get built up on top. So that's really how I structure it, so that not only are they going to be getting healthier, getting fitter, yes, they're going to be losing a little bit of timber, they're going to be losing that belly that they want to get rid of, but by this stage they realise that that's not really the priority. Their priority is making sure that they're healthy enough to be sharp enough in their mind to deal with everything else in life, so that they have the ability to manage their work and their personal life. And when they start seeing that and they start practicing that and they start really doing it, that's when you see the big changes in these men. And that's when you just see them happier. You just see them able to deal with life so much more easily. So, yeah.
And that's what being a driven man is all about. Is it's about doing the things you know you need to do, but also having the awareness. Because I think a lot of guys who come into your program probably just know that pure hustle, but they never actually thought about the different aspects of life that are also important. I think that's because no guy wants to estrange his children or his wife, And no guy wants to be in poor health, yet we get so caught up in different things, and we're so controlled by one little thing, which is the dollar or whatever currency you have in Singapore, or gold. We're controlled by this metal as human beings, but at the end of the day, if we allow the frequency we resonate at to reduce as a result of being obsessed with this one little thing, which is definitely an important thing, but it's not everything, we end up losing the things that are truly important in life. So that's absolutely wonderful. And it's cool to hear you talk this much in depth about it, because I've never actually heard you talk this much in depth. And it's really inspiring for me to see what you do at that level and how much detail goes into it. Because I think that's what's really important to do as coaches, is that we truly do everything that's required to get you to where you want to go, not just with your physical goals, but with the goal of having a better life. Because why does anyone want to get fit? They want to have a better life. They want to feel good. They want to feel happy. They want to feel successful. They want to feel confident. And they don't want to feel like shit. And I think a lot of the times when guys are working these 16-hour days, even if they're absolutely killing their career and they're super, super rich, and they keep chasing more and more money because they think it's going to make them more happy, they end up being a lot less happy. Like, no guy's going to be happy when his body's not optimal, when his rituals aren't optimized, when he doesn't practice gratitude. And I think that's probably one of the quickest things that your clients see as far as results go, simply about being mindful and practicing gratitude, is an increase in happiness and appreciation of what they do have. And so they no longer start taking their kids for granted, their wife for granted, and everything else. And a big part of what I do with my clients, because obviously very different, where a lot of my clients, maybe they are working long hours, but they haven't quite hit that point so far yet. A lot of my clients have possibly had kids, but a lot of my clients have not even gotten married yet. And so it's important to build the right foundation and build that balanced lifestyle from the very beginning, so you truly do make the most out of your life, and so you truly do get as close as possible to your maximum potential. So and a big part of what that is setting the right aspirational identity. Fraser, have you ever read this book called Psycho-Cybernetics?
I've not read it, but I have. I've actually downloaded it on Audible.
Oh, nice.
It's in the queue. It's in the queue. I do a lot of my reading, as it were, on Audible while I'm in the gym or while I'm doing something else, and I feel that. But that's definitely in the list.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely makes it more efficient when you listen to audiobooks. I think everybody should listen to audiobooks, because a book is a great way to get somebody's distilled lifetime experience of knowledge and wisdom in one concentrated format, the best of what they've learned. I think that's the powerful thing about having any kind of mentor or coach or somebody to learn from, or a teacher, right? And that was what books do for us, is books are often the best form of self-education, of having a teacher. And so one thing that's really, really powerful is having the right aspirational identity, because I think everybody envisions themselves at their full potential as being happy and of having success. But a lot of time, if we forget about certain priorities within that success, we start setting the goal-striving mechanism, which is our body and our mind, to fulfill the wrong path. Because let's say that we grew up in extreme poverty. The one thing we didn't have growing up is wealth. And so a lot of the time we think that that's the silver bullet to our happiness. And so if we set our aspirational identity to be as wealthy as possible, but we neglect the other things in life, such as, our family, our health, that's where we end up going. And I would imagine that a lot of your clients may come from that kind of background. For my clients, a lot of the time, the deficit is one of self-love, of self-esteem, where they maybe didn't grow up being somebody who had a stable family life where their parents loved them. And maybe they did, yet they never fit in at school, or they were always different, which, if we learn to embrace our differences, they actually become positive things, because they give us qualities to stand out as unique and be better. Yet a lot of the time, if we grow up feeling insecure about being different, we end up having this deficit where we strive to improve ourselves by increasing our status through our careers, by searching, certain types of relationships, by forming the wrong kinds of friendships or social groups, or even just going into a downward spiral where guys get really depressed and end up spending their lives doing drugs or being addicted to other things like video games. I mean, there's a lot of things guys get addicted to that can be very negative things. Addicted to making money, right? In the case of your guys, in a way, which I think some of your other guys may be, but ultimately it is about setting the right aspirational identity. And so that's a big part of the strategy that I use with my clients, is having that aspirational identity as a driven man. Because as you mentioned earlier, you've created a community with your clients, which when your clients are in a community, which is the strategy that we all use, all the coaches who I've had on this podcast, including myself, the quickest way to shift somebody's beliefs is to surround yourself with people who already have that belief. And for my guys, when we join the Facebook group Driven Men, we start to identify as a driven man, we start to make decisions. What would a driven man do? I am a driven man, so that's the decision I'm going to make. Ultimately, we would perform the right actions to get us to the results we want. The results are determined by your actions. Your actions are determined by your habits. Your habits are determined by your identity, and that is the deepest level of what we do. So Fraser, as far as the identity for your guys, I mean, you've mentioned it before, and I've heard you talk about it, where like to live a noble life, to be a noble man, right? Tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Well, to live a noble life is quite interesting, because there's actually, I found a really good quote that I used, and I don't actually have it in front of me, unfortunately, but it basically means to be honourable, to strive to do your best in everything that you can do, to protect, to love, to care for, and to provide. And that is what it is to be noble. Now, it's a very, very fortunate name that I have, because obviously the meaning of it is that, but it truly does fit in exactly to what it needs to be. You truly need to do that. And if you don't think of yourself at that high standard, that's when you start to make mistakes. That's when you start to make judgment calls that you're going to look back on and think, shouldn't have done that. So that's basically the first part of my code, is to be a noble man, is to actually strive to do your best, to be honest with yourself and others, to actually put in the effort that is required, not just to be successful in your career, but to be successful as a husband, as a father, as a protector, as a provider, as a friend, as a lover, as a companion. You know, and if you don't actually think of everything as a full whole in being that noble man, of living that noble life, then you're actually not going to be setting yourself up for very much success. So, I mean, I'll just touch on this very quickly, because we spoke about health and fitness a lot, and a lot of people will look at people that are in very good shape, and they'll think that, oh, they're in good shape, that means they've got everything sorted out. But, you know, I got a couple of guys in my group who are actually in phenomenal shape. They came in phenomenal shape. But that doesn't mean that they are in balance. And this is what I'm talking about, is that what the benefit those guys do have is that they've already built a habitual structure, but they're not using it. So these guys that come in and they're in very good shape, and people are, oh, why are you here? And it's like, well, because this is a lifestyle program. This is something to improve your overall life and health and well-being and your balance. And these guys are not in balance. You know, I'm sure you know a lot of the guys that you used to work with that spent so much time in the gym, they neglected their home life. How is that different from somebody working in a corporation doing the same thing? Just because they're healthy looking, I'm going to point that one out, they're healthy looking, doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy in life. You know, health is not just down to the physical body. It's down to your emotions, your mind, your lifestyle, your balance, your relationships.
It's interesting to see a lot of the parallels between what it means to be a noble man and what it means to be a driven man, what it means to live the noble life and what it means to live the high test life. Because at the end of the day, it's the description that we resonate with on our own journey, with your journey being that of being from that stressful corporate environment to maintaining that balance and helping others see that balance. For me, a lot of the guys who I work with, and it's interesting, I'll just go back for a sec, because the guys who you're working with are already super, super driven in their careers. What they need to focus on is being more noble to balance out in other aspects of their life.
Yeah.
Now, the guys who I'm working with are guys who are like oftentimes completely lost in multiple areas of their life, who are truly trying to find themselves and figure out what they want to do, what they're passionate about, where they want to go with their lives, or to truly find the focus and balance. And a lot of the time that comes down to this level of confusion. And when people are confused, they take inaction, and inaction becomes a habit as opposed to taking action. And when guys have inaction, their motivation levels go down, their confidence goes down. And so to be a driven man, to be a confident, driven, and successful man, is to have that potency and to live a high testosterone lifestyle instead of living this low testosterone lifestyle as being, you know, this man child as opposed to truly growing up and being a man. So it's interesting to see how at the end of the day, to be a driven man and to be a noble man is quite similar, yet the person who needs to move towards that identity and think about that identity in their life has a very different path with a very similar outcome, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, it's interesting because, and it's not necessarily got to do with age, as it were, it's more got to do with experiences. So it sounds like the guys that are in the high driven men that you're talking about.
Driven men live in the high test lifestyle.
Men live in the high test lifestyle, sorry. So it sounds like they are effectively driving to find themselves. Whereas the guys in the noble life, they're trying to re-find themselves. They already found what they thought was their purpose and they went for it and they're doing great. But they've realized that along the way, they've dropped a few pieces out of their backpack. And they don't have the canteen that they need to take a drink. No, they don't have that extra pair of socks that they need now that they're on the walk. And then having to re-find that thing. Whereas with your guys, it sounds like they are seeking themselves. Whereas with my guys, they need to actually find themselves again. Because nobody starts off, as you said, wanting to have imbalance. Everybody starts off thinking that they're going to get it all, they're going to have it all. And they can, but the problem is that a lot of the time when you start off in a new job, and this, a lot of the guys that might be a little bit younger, or maybe a little bit more just entering working life, what they'll find is that exact same thing that my guys found when they first started, is that just because your boss is sitting, you know, this far away from his desk because his belly's stopping him from getting too much closer, but he's killing the game, he's making a load of money and he's doing really well, that's not normal. Just because the dude down the corridor is doing really, really well, he's in great shape and he hits the gym every lunchtime and he's making loads of money, that doesn't mean that that's normal either, because he might go home to a wife that quite frankly can't stand him, or kids that never get to see him. You know, and that's not balanced, that's not normal. So what I would say is that when these guys are trying to find themselves, being mindful is one of the biggest aspects that you can do to improve yourself, is that be mindful of what your role models actually have. What is their actual situation? Don't just assume that because they did in one aspect, that the way they're doing things is how you should be doing them. And that's when you need to communicate, talk to them. Who knows, in the act of talking to them and trying to find yourself, you might help them find themselves again. You know, and that's one of the biggest things I would say to people, whether they join a coaching program or not. It really doesn't matter which route they take, as long as they take a route that works. You know, it's effectively communication, mindfulness, reflection. And that's the key points of the foundation of starting it. And then everything else can come afterwards.
I really like that format because it resonates a lot with a big part of, you know, it's funny because I have, in a sense, 3 names for the process my clients follow. You're living the high testosterone life, following the awakened path, trying to become a driven man. And so within the awakened path, what we're doing is we are awakening and finding those things within us. Because my belief is that the things that we're looking for, like, you know, oftentimes, as you mentioned with the analogy of the backpack with the canteen falling out, the pair of socks falling out, a lot of these things are things that are within us that we need to access and we need to open up, because I think within each of us is a greater potential than what we're currently living at. That's a big part of what it is to awaken the athlete within, to awaken the driven man within, to awaken the noble man within, and to live the lifestyle that is conducive to your success, happiness, achievement, and to have a positive effect on the people around you. I can't remember what point of yours you just made that I was responding to. However, that seemed to need to come up. But yeah, it really is a big thing. I mean, to be able to build that nucleus within yourself, that groundedness, and to control your thoughts, your mindset. And it was the mindfulness point that you made that made me think of this, which again is to be conscious of your thoughts, to control the way that you think, because ultimately the way that you think is going to determine your output, what you do, what you achieve, who you become. And it's very, very important to be conscious of those things, because if you don't choose how you're going to think, somebody else will, or your feelings will. You'll be triggered by things that happen in your day-to-day life, and those emotions will dictate how you think, how you feel, and how you behave, and ultimately the results and actions that you take in life. Or you'll be controlled by somebody else who doesn't always have your best interest in mind, because a lot of the time the people who seek to control others have negative negative intentions and self-serving intentions. And so I think the big thing that we do as coaches is, some coaches out there will hold the individual's hand and try to control the individual's thinking in a way that just allows that person to get the result. But ultimately, one thing I tell my clients all the time is that if I died tomorrow, my goal is that you will continue to follow what I teach you, because I build ownership and accountability within yourself. And I'm sure that you do the same for your clients based on the foundation that we have as coaches and the philosophy that we share as coaches. Is it is ultimately about taking ownership as a man and not downplaying things. I think probably what a lot of you guys have habitually done is, because they have this justification and the shining armor of being that guy who works 16 hours a day so he can make enough money for his family, ultimately ends up having, this denial and downplays the different aspects of their life that are going downhill, the fires that are burning around them, if they just say, it's okay, I'm on this good path, when in reality they're not on a good path. And so to be honest with yourself and take ownership for what's truly going on in your life is a big key to getting out of the place of being stuck and truly moving to where you want to go, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I really like the metaphor of mountain climbing.
Sorry, what was that?
Really like the metaphor of mountain climbing when it comes to this. So at the beginning, you get taught all of the mountain survival skills. So you get taught how to use the ropes, how to hit the anchors in, how to use all of the equipment that you need, and how to actually go on the path. But then you still have your Sherpa, you still have your mountain guide who's with you on the journey. Now, just because they're the coach, just because they're the Sherpa, just because they're the guide, doesn't mean that they are 100% perfect, not even a little bit. It just means that they've done that path before. They've been on that path before. They know the best route. But you've already had all of the training. When I bring the guys in, I call it the onboarding. I call it their initiation. And that's when they get all of the more intense training side of things. And then afterwards, it comes in more sort of dripping in so that it doesn't take up as much intensity and time as it goes on. Very similar to getting an intense training course in mountain climbing. And then as you're climbing, somebody's saying, oh, yeah, you're better to just take that step to the left. Don't stand on that boulder, it will slip, So the thing is that if you don't have your mountain guide, you're still going to be able to climb the mountain. But the chance of you going off the correct path, the chance of you slipping and falling back down the mountain a little bit and having to climb that same area again, and knowing what you're actually going to get to when you hit that summit, that only comes with having your mountain guide with your coach. But that's not to say that you can't climb a mountain by yourself. It's just a hell of a lot harder, a hell of a lot more dangerous, and you might get to the top, you might not. But if you've got that mountain guide with you, they're going to do everything that they can to get you to the top. And as long as you're willing to put in the work to climb that mountain, he'll get you there.
Absolutely.
And that's one of my favorite metaphors for it.
100%. And to have that Sherpa is also going to ensure, like you said, that you're not going to fall down the mountain and have to climb back up with a couple of bruises of, that you had from falling down. And that's huge. I mean, I think a big part of what will help with that, especially as you translate that metaphor over to an individual who's looking to get in better shape, achieve better balance in his life, and have ultimately what we all want as men, which is a balance between family, finances, and fitness. When you want to have that kind of balance, yet you waste time trying to figure it all out, you waste resources trying to figure it all out, you hurt people along the way by not doing it properly. Those are some big pitfalls that a person must look out for when they are setting out to do things. And so it really is important that the individual is held accountable to stick with the discipline, because at the end of the day, it's not easy to find that balance. We mentioned a little earlier in this podcast that we all want to have it all, but we don't want to do it all. Yet we have to do it all if we want to have it all. And that is where it's so important to have the right tribe of people surrounding you. Because think about it. For the guys in the environment that your clients find themselves in, they're surrounded by people who have no balance. And if they aren't able to achieve that balance within themselves and have a tribe of like-minded individuals, it's too easy to get swept up with the norm. Likewise, the individuals who my clients are often surrounded by are average people. And average people have low standards. Average people make excuses. Average people don't do the work. Average people are looking for the easy way out. And I think the same applies with, the average high performers who your clients are surrounded by, which sounds like an oxymoron, average high performers. But as you said, the global culture is the average high performer is not balanced and becomes a very toxic norm. And we live in a society where there are a lot of toxic norms. So like for my clients who are often in their 20s and 30s, they're surrounded by people who never grew up either. And so it's easy for the individual to not grow up. And when you don't grow up, you never become a man. You never become a man. You never achieve confidence, happiness, and success at the truest, deepest level, and that's your maximum potential. And that is ultimately my greatest worry for the people who don't sign up with me, is that they never end up achieving that and they end up having a midlife crisis later down the road. Or I think the greatest fear that you have for the people who don't sign up with you is that they end up like the individual you mentioned who had multiple strokes and ended up going back to the UK alone and crippled. I mean, that's terrible. It's a heartbreaking story. And it makes me think about myself, where sometimes I don't have the best work-life balance. I'm going to be real. I'll be honest. I sometimes don't have the best work-life balance where I'm always trying to make things happen, but end up neglecting myself even as a coach. And so it makes me think about my future. And it's so easy to be so caught up in the moment, to not think about the long term. With your guys, it's let me get that next deal. Let me work extra hours to make that extra bit of money. Let me go on that travel trip. But they forget about their health. They forget about their kids until it's too late. But ultimately, you got to think long term. And that's why the instant gratification culture that we're constantly told and sold in the modern society is so toxic to our well-being and to our long-term success.
The ironic thing about that as well is that a lot of the time when you talk to coaches, they don't actually have that balance. So like, even within the mastermind we're part of, I hear people talking about, oh yeah, I'm grafting, I'm hustling. And everyone's like, yeah, that's awesome. And it is awesome. But have they made time for their family? Have they made time for their loved ones? Have they made time for themselves? Have they gone and worked out? Have they walked the dogs? Have they done X? Have they done Y? Have they done Z? Because work is not the be all and end all. Whether it's building your own business and doing a coaching thing or a bar or consultation or whatever you want to do, that's not the be all and end all. Because if you graft and hustle and do not think about anything else, you're going to end up having to join my program. Because you might be very successful in what you're doing, but the balance is still not there. Because knowing something and executing it is very different.
And if you don't execute, do you truly know? That's another thing guys got to ask themselves. And I just want to add one other thing on the note of that. If you don't do my program while you're young, when you're older and you're driven in your career, you're going to have to do Fraser's program as well. So, there's no way around it. You got to have somebody to hold you accountable and help you build the right operating system. It's just a matter of how long you want to wait. And I think that every moment waited is a moment wasted for anybody who finds themselves not living life the way that they know they need to. Because I think deep down, we all know, like the guy who's working 16-hour days, downplaying his health when he's coughing and when he wakes up feeling like shit after a night of drinking and smoking cigarettes, there's no way to ignore how shitty you feel, but then you go drown yourself and make more money. The guy who, and I'm just going to be a little bit real, a little bit crude here, but I think a lot of young guys, they're spending their whole days, playing video games and jacking off and not eating well and not going to the gym and not actually taking care of themselves, talking to real girls, making the most out of their life, getting after their career. And if you're living life like that, you feel like shit and you downplay it and you try to hide in different things, drugs, porn, whatever you addict yourself to, video games. But at the end of the day, you can't hide from the truth. And the sooner you admit it, the sooner you better yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that. In fact, just as a wee bit of a confirmer to what you were saying there, one of the exercises when the guys join the community is an introduction video and a declaration. And I can honestly say that 50% of the guys that are in their 50s when they come in, because the age range of my group's like your late 20s to your early 60s. It's quite a large range, but some people, it depends what your experiences are. But 50% of the guys that come in they always say, I wish I did this in my 20s.
Mm.
It's so illuminating. I mean, they come in and they say, guys, I'm really, really pleased that I've joined, but I wish I'd done this in my 20s. And then also what I do is I get them to talk about their journey later on down the line. So when we're having the meetings like this in big groups, and I'll ask them, how do you feel? Have you anything you'd like to say to the new guys that are coming in? And sometimes when new guys are coming in and they're in their early 30s, you get the guys that are in their 50s saying, you're so lucky that you did this now. Because when you start it later on, it's phenomenal, but it is a much harder journey. And I think that's something that is needed to be highlighted to a lot of the men that they'll be looking to you to join your program, and they might be swivering a little bit. Don't end up being one of those guys that says, God, I wish I'd done it when I was younger. Because there's no time like the present, and just pull the trigger. Because if you don't, you're going to end up in a much worse situation, and the journey gets more difficult.
That's one thing I've learned too, is tomorrow never comes. Now, it is important to evaluate the decisions you're going to make, because you don't want to be too trigger happy and pull the trigger on the wrong thing. And I would say for anybody looking for a coach, look to the coach whose frequency you resonate with, and look to the coach who you can tell really cares about you, knows what they're doing, and gets good results for their clients. The coach who's willing to share all the information on how what they do works. The coach who's willing to actually send you a training video that explains how the system works and shows how it's worked with their different clients, as opposed to the coach who says, hey, I'll tell you how it all works once you come on the inside, but I just promise you it's going to work. Because I'll be real, I've hired different mentors in my life, and the particular mentor who we both work with has been amazing. However, some of the other mentors I've hired have sold me on the dream and hard sold me on a certain thing, got me to invest money. And then while there is delivery there, ultimately it isn't what I thought I'd signed up for. And it creates this sense of dissonance within myself where I have buyer's remorse. Whereas if you work with a coach who's truly willing to show you everything you need to know to make the right decision, who also pushes you to make the commitment to yourself, because let's be real, that's what a coach does, is they do hold you accountable and they do push you to take action that you wouldn't take yourself. When you work with a coach like that, and you know within yourself that you need to sign up regardless, and they're not pressuring you from the outside, but rather they show you what's already within yourself, that's when you know that it's the right fit and that you have to pull that trigger for yourself, because you're not just doing it for them to appease them or please them or whatever, but you're really doing it because you know that you need to do it. And ultimately, like, that's what you'll see in someone like Fraser or myself, as you look at Fraser's LinkedIn, at his Facebook, at everything else, and you'll see his message is congruent.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an important thing that people need to really think about. And it's something that a lot of people find difficult because of misconceptions in themselves, misconceptions of their upbringing. And it's not their fault, that's the thing. A lot of this, actually, I'll not go into this too deep because it would take an awful long time, but a lot of it boils back to the Industrial Revolution and how it went from men basically mentoring their sons to going and working in a factory or working in an office. And as a result, the men that grew up in that area, the men that grew up and the generations afterwards, the culture has got more and more to the point where people say things like, we don't talk about our feelings as men. I don't want a coach. That's not the type of man I am. I don't need anybody else's help. We all hear people talking like that. And these are just stories. These are just excuses, but they don't even realize that they're excuses. They don't even know that it's a story because it's what their father said. It's what their father's father said. So I'm just going to leave this with one story, which is massively powerful for me. And that is that my grandfather, he was a paratrooper and he jumped on D-Day into France. And he survived. And any time you asked him anything about the war, he would just say, doing what I needed to do to survive and doing what I needed to do for the people back home. And that's why he would never tell you any stories about being in France or anything like that. But I remember very clearly one of my older cousins asking him one time, what was it like the day before you jumped? what was it like the day before D-Day? And he said, well, I was very lucky. We had a sergeant that sat us all down and had us all share how we felt, share what we were afraid of, share what we were uncertain about, and share what we were confident about. And everybody spoke about their own feelings and their own confidences and their own concerns. And as a result, everybody that was with that sergeant realised that they are not alone, that they are all in the same boat, or plane in that case. But they were all in the same situation. They all had fears, they all had doubts, they all had misconceptions, they all had something that they were confident about and something that they were fearful of. And just by sharing, they realised not only that they weren't alone, but there was men that were with them that had either similar fears or had confidences that complemented their fears, so that they were with somebody that could help them. And they were with people that they could also help. And he truly believed that that was why he survived jumping on D-Day. It was because of the fact that he knew he wasn't alone, and he knew that he was with other people in the exact same situation, aiming for the exact same result, but were able to help, lean on each other, and support each other when and if required. And if that's not powerful enough for somebody to realise the power of sharing, the power of communication, and the power of actually asking, then I don't know what else would help them.
Wow, that's powerful. And it really does take courage to share and to be vulnerable. And that's the thing at the end of the day is a lot of guys who say a real man doesn't show his feelings, a real man doesn't open up, all these different toxic real man ideas that we get from old school masculine figures who in many ways, these men are honorable. These are driven men who stand up for what they do what they need to do, regardless of whether they feel like it. Ultimately, the mindset that ends up keeping men trapped in this place where they can't open up, be vulnerable, and share is one of fear. And no man wants to live with fear. Courage is one of the ultimate masculine virtues that speaks to the heart of the masculine soul. And so when you start to realize that a fear to open up, a fear to let somebody help you is ultimately ego, it's ultimately pride, but it is ultimately fear and a lack of courage. That is a critical thing to realize is, do you want to choose pride and fear, or do you want to choose courage and virtue and open-mindedness and growth and doing the right thing? Because at the end of the day, you got to think, what is the right thing? Is the right thing to cling to this ego of pride and to not be vulnerable and to not open up and to be a victim to fear and not reach your maximum potential? Or is it to not waste time living beneath your potential and to actually leap ahead and invest in oneself with time, money, and energy to make things happen, right? At the end of the day, we must invest in ourselves as men to become the best we can be. And I think it's every man's duty to reach the maximum level of success, greatness, happiness, balance, and positive effect on the people around him that he possibly can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, it's something that's extraordinarily powerful. And if anybody actually looks back into the history of people that they thought were the most manly or the most powerful and the most heroic, if you actually look back into the actual history of the likes of the Spartans, or the likes of the Roman centurions, and the likes of the Vikings even, or the Mongols, there was a lot of sharing, there was a lot of culture, there was poetry, there was singing, there was brotherhood. The idea of being stoic is actually that. It's not actually what people think Stoicism is. Stoicism is not being very stern and not speaking to anybody. That's not Stoicism. Stoicism is being stern and serious when it's required, and open, friendly, and communicative when you can be, and being the best person that you can be. It's effectively being that driven man, being that noble man. That's what it actually means to be stoic. So that's a misconception of a lot of people thinking on the old school side. It's not even true. A lot of these old school guys, they would have had brotherhoods. They would have had fraternities where they share. But that side of things has been forgotten. And as a result, the modern man who looks back on these stoic old school men don't realize that what these old school men actually had was a fraternity, was a brotherhood, was the ability to share. They just didn't do it out in public as often.
Wow, that's interesting. I remember the first time you brought up stoicism, and I kind of shook my head just like I did right now. And then you went into that whole description of the Spartans. It really is powerful. Well,
Hmm.
Fraser, we're coming up on an hour. I mean, I knew this was going to be a long podcast. We got a lot to say, but yeah, man, did you have any closing remarks for our viewers at home?
Well, to be honest, I think the closing remark of stoicism and the ability to share being what can save you, even in such a ridiculously stressful and dangerous position as it was on D-Day, I think those 2 points are probably the best things to leave it on.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
if anybody needs to hear them again, just rewind the podcast and listen to that again, because there's nothing wrong with rewatching and re-listening to something that's as powerful as that can be.
100%. And I read that we tend to only retain about 8 to 15% of what we actually read or listen to. So feel free to listen to this 10 times if you want. Then you can get 100% of it. But regardless, Fraser, thanks so much for being here, man. It's always a pleasure. I'm glad we were able to get this in tonight. And absolutely, man, it's always a pleasure to learn from you, to be inspired by you, and to see what you're doing for your clients, because it always helps me to see what I can do for my clients as well at a greater level. So again, guys, a man's life is all about service and maximizing the contribution that he can bring to humankind. And again, success is the number one priority. So be open, be a stoic in the sense that Fraser shared, and not in the sense that sometimes we think about. And at the end of the day, be a driven man, be a noble man, live that high test life, live a noble life, and ultimately follow the noble path, follow the awakened path, whichever resonates with where you currently find yourself in life. It is ultimately the key to your success and reaching the point where you want to go.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Munir.
Awesome. Fraser, I'll talk to you soon, brother.
Okay, talk to you soon. Thank you.